The chipped jade handle of the letter opener felt cold against her palm, though the summer sun had baked the throne room for hours. Elara tightened her fingers around it, then placed it back on the king's desk exactly where she found it. Some habits from childhood never left her: the need to touch things, to feel their weight, to understand them. Her father used to say she trusted her hands more than her eyes. The throne room of Eldenhold Castle smelled like roses dying in tall vases and the faint polish they used on the marble floors every morning. August 12th. She remembered the date because the harvest festival was supposed to start in 3 days, and the entire kingdom of Varathian was preparing to celebrate. Banners of gold and green hung from every window. Baskets of early apples lined the corridors. Elara stood at attention beside the throne, her back straight, her uniform crisp. 12 years of service to the crown, and her body knew exactly how to stand, where to look, when to breathe. She was 34 years old, the youngest captain of the guard in the kingdom's 300-year history, and absolutely certain of her place in the world. That certainty wavered every time she looked at Kaelen. He leaned against a pillar on the far side of the room, arms crossed, dark hair falling across his forehead. The royal spymaster never stood like a normal person. He draped himself against things like he owned them, like the architecture existed just to hold him up. At 37, he had spent 15 years collecting secrets the way farmers collected harvest, and he wore that knowledge like a second skin. They had been rivals for a decade, ever since she caught him sneaking through the East Wing at midnight during a diplomatic summit. She thought he was an assassin. He thought she was a naive soldier playing politics. Neither of them ever fully forgave the other for being right. The king, Theron III, sat on his throne reading documents with half-glasses balanced on his nose. He was 62 now, his beard completely white, his hands starting to shake in the mornings. He had found Elara when she was 11, a starving orphan picking pockets in the capital city of Alderheart. He gave her food, then training, then purpose. She owed him everything. Kaelen's gaze moved slowly across the room, cataloguing everyone. The visiting merchant from the southern provinces with yellow shoes that didn't match his coat. The lady-in-waiting whose hands trembled whenever she poured wine. The young soldier by the door who kept checking his sword strap like he expected trouble. Kaelen noticed everything. That was his job. That was also, Elara suspected, simply how his mind worked, collecting details the way she collected loyalty. She felt his eyes on her for a moment. Brief. Almost nothing. Then they moved past, landing on the king's desk. On the letter opener. On the map spread beneath it showing the mountain passes. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. A fraction of tension in his shoulders. Elara filed it away without understanding why. A servant entered through the side door carrying a silver tray with a crystal decanter of wine and a single glass. Elara knew most servants by name, but this one was unfamiliar. Middle-aged, with a receding hairline and a nervous twitch in his left eye. He kept his gaze down, focused on the tray, on his feet, on anything except the people around him. The king looked up and smiled. Ah, perfect timing. This heat makes an old man thirsty. The servant approached the throne, his steps careful and measured. Too careful. Elara noticed how he gripped the tray, knuckles white. The crystal decanter caught the afternoon light and scattered rainbows across the marble floor. "Thank you, son," the king said, reaching for the glass. "What's your name? I don't think I've seen you before." The servant's eye twitched violently. "Morwen, your majesty. I usually work in the kitchens." "Well, Morwen from the kitchens, I appreciate you braving the heat." The king took a sip of wine and sighed with satisfaction. You can tell the cook the wine selection was excellent tonight. Morwen bowed and stepped back. As he turned to leave, he stumbled slightly, catching himself on the arm of a nearby chair. The decanter sloshed but didn't spill. Elara almost laughed. Nervous servants were common around the king. It meant nothing. Then she saw Kaelen move. He pushed off the pillar with explosive speed, crossing the marble floor in seconds. His hand reached for her arm, his face set in an expression she had never seen before, raw, urgent, terrified. He grabbed her and threw her sideways with all his strength. Elara hit the floor hard, her elbow cracking against stone, pain shooting up her arm. She heard fabric tear behind her, heard a heavy thud that vibrated through the floor, heard gasps and screams starting to build. She rolled over, reaching for her sword, and saw the knife embedded in the marble floor exactly where she had been standing. The blade was still quivering. Black handle, curved blade, no markings. The kind of weapon used by people who didn't want to be identified. Behind her, guards were shouting. Someone was crying. The king had dropped his wine glass, which shattered into 100 pieces, red liquid spreading across the white marble like blood. Kaelen stood over her, breathing hard, one hand still extended where he had grabbed her. His eyes scanned the room, the windows, the ceiling, the doors. Already cataloguing. Already calculating. Elara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cool floor to make them stop. 12 years of training, and she had frozen. She had seen nothing. Suspected nothing. If Kaelen hadn't pushed her. "Stop trusting the obvious threats," he said quietly, offering her his hand. His palm was warm. His grip steady. She let him pull her up, and for the first time in 10 years of rivalry, she didn't let go immediately. The knife in the floor caught the afternoon light. The chipped jade letter opener sat harmless on the king's desk. And somewhere in the chaos, a servant with a twitching eye had disappeared into the shadows. Elara looked at Kaelen's face, really looked at him for the first time, and saw something she had never noticed before. He was scared. Not for himself. For her. The afternoon heat pressed down on the throne room. The roses continued to wilt in their vases. And everything Elara thought she knew about her kingdom, her king, and the quiet man beside her began to crack. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack through bone. The sound filled her ears, drowning out the screams that echoed through the throne room. She stood there, frozen for what felt like an eternity but couldn't have been more than 2 seconds, staring at the knife still vibrating in the marble floor. Then her body took over. 20 years of training, 12 years of active service, thousands of hours of drills. Her muscles remembered what her mind couldn't process. She drew her sword in one smooth motion, the leather wrap on the hilt slick against her sweaty palm. The blade caught the afternoon light as she positioned herself between the king and the windows, the doors, every possible threat. But her eyes found Kaelen. He was already moving again, not toward the knife or the assassin or the king, but toward the side door where the servant with the twitching eye had disappeared. Elara made her choice in that moment. The first irreversible choice of many to come. Instead of guarding the king like every instinct demanded, she ran after Kaelen. Her boots pounded against the marble, the sound sharp and urgent. Guards shouted behind her, asking questions she couldn't answer. Someone was crying, that high, breathless sound of shock setting in. The smell of spilled wine and crushed roses followed her through the door. The corridor beyond was dim after the brightness of the throne room. Stone walls, torches flickering in iron brackets, the smell of damp and old tapestries. Kaelen was 20 feet ahead, running hard, his dark hair flying behind him. She had never seen him run before. Spymasters didn't run. They lurked in shadows and appeared where you least expected them. "Kaelen," she shouted. He didn't stop, didn't look back, just pointed ahead, toward a narrow staircase that led to the lower levels of the castle. The servant's footsteps echoed from somewhere below, growing fainter. Elara poured on speed. Her lungs burned. The August heat made the air thick and heavy, and sweat dripped down her back beneath her uniform. She caught up to Kaelen at the top of the stairs, and together they plunged into the darkness. The staircase twisted down in a tight spiral. Centuries of feet had worn the stone steps smooth and uneven. Elara almost fell twice, catching herself against the damp wall, feeling ancient moss slick under her fingers. The torches here were few and far between, leaving long stretches of blackness between pools of flickering light. Below them, a door slammed. They burst into the kitchen level, into a world of steam and noise and chaos. Cooks shouted over bubbling pots. Servants carried trays of bread and meat. The smell of roasting chicken and baking bread filled the air, so normal, so everyday, that Elara felt like she had stepped into a different world. Kaelen grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a narrow door near the ovens. "The old library," he said, his voice low and urgent. "There's a hidden room behind the third bookshelf. He's heading there." "How do you know that?" Elara demanded. He didn't answer. Just pushed through the door and into the quiet corridor beyond. The library was dusty and forgotten, used maybe twice a year by scholars who requested ancient texts. Sunlight filtered through high windows, illuminating floating dust motes that danced in the golden light. The smell of old paper and leather bindings filled the air, comforting and familiar. They found the servant behind the third bookshelf, just as Kaelen predicted. The shelf swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a small room beyond. The man stood inside, breathing hard, his twitching eye now going wild. He held no weapon. He looked more frightened than dangerous. But on a small table beside him lay papers. Maps of the castle. Guard rotation schedules. A list of names with dates next to them. And a leather-bound ledger with a familiar sigil stamped on the cover. Elara's blood turned to ice. She knew that sigil. She had seen it every day for 12 years. The royal crest of King Theron III, pressed into wax on official documents, embroidered on his robes, carved into the throne itself. She pushed past Kaelen and picked up the ledger. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Page after page of payments, dates going back 5 years. Large sums of gold. To names she didn't recognize, merchants and traders and foreign diplomats. And next to each payment, a location. The mountain passes. The eastern watchtower. The castle's secret tunnels. The final entry was dated today, August 12th. Next to it, written in handwriting she knew better than her own, was a single word, throne room. Elara's knees went weak. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Her mentor. The man who saved her from starvation. The king who sat on the throne while someone tried to kill her. His handwriting. His payments. His betrayal. Kaelen stood behind her, so close she could feel the warmth of his body. He didn't touch her. Didn't speak. Just waited. "This is his handwriting," Elara whispered, her voice cracking on the last word. The servant, Morwen, the king had called him, started crying. Great heaving sobs that shook his thin shoulders. "I didn't want to," he said between gasps. "He said my daughter would be taken if I didn't help. The silent knife, he called it. A group of loyalists who want a new king. But His Majesty, he's been paying them for years. Building his own secret army. The assassin today wasn't supposed to miss. She never misses." Elara turned to look at him. "She." Morwen nodded, tears streaming down his face. "The woman in the curtain. She's their best. The king hired her himself. But your friend." He looked at Kaelen with something like awe. He knew. "He pushed you. She's never failed before." The afternoon light shifted through the high windows. Dust motes continued their slow dance. Somewhere above, guards were still searching for threats, protecting a king who had tried to have his own captain killed. Elara looked at Kaelen. Really looked at him. Saw the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way he held himself like a man expecting another blow. He had known. For how long, she didn't know. But he had watched her back when her king was plotting her death. "Why?" she asked simply. Kaelen met her eyes. For once, he didn't look away. Didn't deflect with sarcasm or change the subject with a question. He just stood there, in a dusty hidden room, surrounded by proof of betrayal, and told the truth with his silence. The ledger felt heavy in Elara's hands. Outside, the castle continued its busy afternoon. Cooks cooked. Guards guarded. Servants served. And a king sat on his throne, probably already planning his next move, his next quiet betrayal. Elara closed the ledger and tucked it under her arm. She looked at Morwen, still crying, still terrified. "You're coming with us," she said. "Your daughter too. Where are they keeping her?" Morwen's eyes widened with desperate hope. The East Tower. Room 12. Kaelen nodded once. I know the way. They left the hidden room, the bookshelf swinging shut behind them. Elara's heart still pounded, but differently now. Not with fear. With purpose. Everything she believed had been a lie. But lies, she was learning, could also set you free. 3 days had passed since Elara last saw the sun. She knew this because she counted every morning when the torches in the Undercroft were relit, their flickering light marking another dawn in this damp, forgotten world beneath the castle. August 15th. The harvest festival should have started today. Instead, she sat on a cold stone floor, wrapped in darkness and the heavy weight of everything she had lost. The Undercroft stretched beneath the eastern wing of Eldenhold Castle, a maze of ancient foundations and forgotten storage rooms. Centuries of dust covered broken furniture and rusted tools. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a steady rhythm that had become her only measure of time. The smell of damp earth and decay filled every breath, clinging to her clothes, her hair, her skin. Kaelen sat across from her, his back against a crumbling wall. In 3 days, they had barely spoken. There was nothing to say that the silence didn't already hold. They had rescued Morwen's daughter from the East Tower, a girl of 8 with her father's nervous eyes and her mother's brave smile. Mother and daughter now hid with sympathetic servants in the lower city, waiting for news that might never come. The kingdom believed Elara was dead. Kaelen had made sure of it. A burned body in a guard's uniform, placed in the rubble of a collapsed storehouse. The official story said Captain Elara died saving citizens during an unfortunate fire. The king had even ordered a memorial. How perfectly convenient. Elara stared at her reflection in a dark puddle on the floor. The stagnant water showed her a stranger. Hollow eyes. Dirt on her cheek. 3 days of beard shadow on a woman who had never missed a morning shave in 12 years of service. She looked like what she had become. Nothing. The mirror moment came without warning. She looked at that reflection and saw, for the first time, the truth she had spent her whole life avoiding. She wasn't loyal. She was desperate. She hadn't loved the king. She had needed him. Needed someone to save her, to give her purpose, to tell her she mattered. Every oath she swore, every enemy she fought, every wound she took, none of it was honor. It was hunger. The same hunger that drove her to pick pockets as a starving child. The shape had changed, but the emptiness remained. Tears fell into the puddle, rippling her reflection away. She let them come. 3 days of shock and fear and grief finally breaking through. She cried for the girl she had been, for the captain she had pretended to be, for the kingdom that never really existed. She cried until her chest ached and her eyes burned and there was nothing left. When she looked up, Kaelen had moved. He sat beside her now, close enough to touch but not touching. His presence was the only warmth in this cold, dead place. I knew your father, he said quietly, before he died. Elara stared at him. Her father had died when she was 8, a farmer who worked himself into an early grave. She barely remembered his face. He wasn't a farmer, Kaelen continued. He was a spy. The best I ever trained. He worked for the old king, Theron's father. When Theron took the throne, your father saw what was coming. The paranoia. The secret deals. The way he collected loyal people like possessions. Your father tried to warn people. Theron had him killed. Made it look like an accident. Like exhaustion. Like a farmer who worked too hard. The words hit Elara like physical blows. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Her father. Her whole childhood. All of it built on a lie. How long have you known? 15 years. Since I became spymaster. I found the files in Theron's private chambers. Your father's name, his real name, his mission reports. Everything. And you never told me. Kaelen finally looked at her, and she saw something break in his eyes. I was protecting you. The same way your father asked me to before he died. He made me promise. Keep her safe. Let her live a normal life. Don't let this world touch her. Elara laughed, the sound harsh and broken in the darkness. Normal. I've been a soldier since I was 11. I've killed people for that man. I've bled for him. I've believed in him. I know. Kaelen's voice was barely a whisper. I've watched you for 15 years. Watched you train, watched you fight, watched you give everything to a monster because I was too much of a coward to tell you the truth. Every time you smiled at him, every time he praised you, I wanted to scream. But I made a promise. The water dripped. The torches flickered. Somewhere above, the harvest festival was probably starting. Citizens celebrating a king they didn't know, in a kingdom built on bones. Elara looked at Kaelen. Really looked, past the rivalry, past the secrets, past everything. She saw a man who had carried an impossible weight for 15 years. Who had protected her by staying close, by watching everyone, by positioning himself where he could always see the threats. Who had pushed her out of the way of an assassin's blade without a second thought. You stayed for me, she said. Not a question. A realization. Kaelen nodded slowly. Every day. Every mission. Every moment. I stayed for you. The words hung in the damp air between them. 15 years of rivalry. 15 years of sharp words and cold glances. All of it a mask. He had loved her from a distance, in the only way he could, by keeping her alive, by watching over her, by being the enemy she could trust. Elara reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but they wrapped around hers like he had been waiting his whole life for permission to hold on. What do we do now? She asked. Kaelen squeezed her hand. The harvest feast. Tomorrow night. Theron will be in the great hall with all his nobles, all his guards. It's the only time he's vulnerable. We have the ledger. We have Morwen's testimony. We have the truth. Against an army. Against an army. He smiled, a real smile, the first she had ever seen from him. But we also have something better. We have each other. Elara looked at their joined hands, then back at the puddle where her reflection had shown her nothing. Now she saw something different. Not a loyal soldier. Not a desperate orphan. Just a woman, dirty and tired and scared, holding hands with a man who had loved her in silence for half a life. And then Elara realized Kaelen's cold distance, his constant vigilance, his refusal to let anyone close. It was all a lie. He wasn't cold. He was so terrified of losing anyone else that he had built walls of information and isolation to protect them all. He knew about the king's betrayal for a month. He stayed, not as a spymaster, but as a silent shield, waiting for his moment to save the one person, her, who could end it. The torchlight flickered. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, she let herself feel something she had never allowed before. Hope. Tell me about my father, she whispered. Tell me everything. And in the darkness of the undercroft, with water dripping and torches burning low, Kaelen told her. About a man who laughed easily and loved deeply. Who chose danger to protect his family. Who made his best friend promise to watch over his little girl. Who would have been so proud of the woman she became. Elara listened until the torches burned down to embers. And when dawn came on August 16th, she was ready. Not as a captain. Not as a loyal soldier. But as a father's daughter, finally coming home to herself. The great hall of Eldenhold Castle had never looked more beautiful. Thousands of candles flickered in crystal chandeliers, casting warm light across tables draped in gold cloth. Autumn flowers spilled from every corner, deep red roses, orange marigolds, yellow chrysanthemums. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread filled the air, mixing with expensive perfumes and the faint sweetness of honey cakes. August 16th, 7 in the evening. The harvest feast had begun. Elara stood in a small alcove behind the gallery, watching through a crack in the wooden screen. She wore a servant's plain brown dress, her hair pulled back and hidden under a simple scarf. 3 days without proper food had sharpened the angles of her face, made her look older, harder. But her eyes burned with something that hadn't been there before. Purpose. Kaelen stood beside her, dressed in the dark clothes of a maintenance worker. He had spent the afternoon in the rafters, checking ropes and pulleys, making sure everything was ready. Now he watched the crowd below with the same intensity he had always shown, but something was different. When he looked at Elara, his eyes softened. "You ready for this?" he whispered. Elara touched the pocket of her dress. The chipped jade letter opener rested there, cool against her thigh. Not as a weapon. As proof. As a beginning. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. "I just didn't know it." Below them, the feast continued. 300 nobles filled the great hall, laughing and eating and drinking. The king sat at the center of the high table, surrounded by his most trusted advisers. He looked relaxed, happy, every inch the beloved monarch. His white beard was neatly trimmed. His robes glittered with gold thread. He raised his glass in a toast, and the entire hall cheered. Alara's stomach turned. "Showtime," Kaelen murmured. He squeezed her hand once, then slipped away into the shadows. Elara took a deep breath. Then she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked out of the alcove. Not as a servant. Not as a soldier. As something new entirely. She moved through the crowd like water flowing around stones. Nobles barely glanced at her, just another servant bringing food or wine. The music from the gallery swelled, a lively harvest tune that made people tap their feet and clap along. Children ran between tables, chasing each other with sticky fingers. A dog barked somewhere near the kitchens. Elara kept walking. Toward the high table. Toward the king. He saw her when she was 20 feet away. His eyes widened slightly, recognition flickering across his face before he smoothed it away. Good. Let him wonder. Let him worry. She stopped before the high table and bowed low, the way servants did. When she straightened, she held the ledger in both hands, wrapped in gold silk that caught the candlelight. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the noise. "I bring a gift. Found in the library, hidden behind old books. The archivist thought you would want it immediately." The king's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. He recognized the ledger. Of course he did. His entire secret life was written in those pages. "How thoughtful," he said smoothly. "Bring it here." Elara climbed the 3 steps to the high table. Each step felt monumental, heavy with meaning. Behind her, the music continued. People laughed. Glasses clinked. Normal sounds in a world that would never be normal again. She placed the ledger before the king, keeping the silk wrapped around it. His hand reached out, fingers touching the familiar leather cover. For a moment, their eyes met. His held warning. Hers held something he had never seen from her before. Freedom. "I served you for 12 years, Elara said quietly, for his ears only. "I bled for you, killed for you, believed in you, and you tried to have me murdered." The king's face went pale beneath his beard. His hand gripped the ledger. "You're supposed to be dead." "I know." Elara smiled, and it felt strange on her face, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. "But I'm very hard to kill. You should have asked your spymaster. He could have told you." Above them, in the gallery, the music faltered for just a second. Kaelen's signal. He was in position. The king's eyes darted around the hall, looking for guards, looking for help. But his personal guard were all at the far end of the room, distracted by the feast. The nearest soldiers were 20 feet away, laughing at a joke. "You can't do anything here," the king hissed. "One word from me and you're arrested. The ledger proves nothing. I'll say you forged it." "Probably true," Elara admitted. "You're very good at lies. You've had lots of practice." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the chipped jade letter opener. The king flinched, reaching for his own hidden dagger. But Elara didn't raise the blade. She simply held it up, showing him. "You gave me this when I was 11. Said it was for opening letters, but really it was for reminding me who I belong to. Every time I used it, I thought of you, of how you saved me, of how much I owed you." Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going. "I don't owe you anything anymore. You killed my father. You lied to me every single day. You turned my loyalty into a weapon against me. But this. She looked at the letter opener, at the chip in the jade, at the years of service it represented. This is mine now. Not yours. Mine. The king's hand crept toward his belt. Don't, Elara said softly. He did anyway. His dagger cleared the sheath just as Kaelen dropped from the rafters. He landed on the table between them, sending plates and glasses crashing to the floor. Nobles screamed. Women grabbed their children. Men reached for weapons that weren't there. Kaelen stood on the ruined feast, his dark eyes fixed on the king. Drop it, he said. It's over. The king's dagger clattered onto the table. His face had gone completely white, his hands shaking visibly. All around them, guards were finally reacting, pushing through the crowd, swords drawn. But they stopped when they saw who stood on the table. Their spymaster. And beside him, their captain. Alive. Elara looked out at the hall, at 300 nobles who had cheered this man moments ago. She held up the ledger. Inside this book, she said loudly, is proof that your king has been paying assassins for 5 years. Proof that he ordered my death 3 days ago. Proof that he murdered his own father's loyal servants to hide his crimes. Read it yourselves. Ask your own questions. Decide what kind of kingdom you want to live in. Silence fell over the great hall. Even the children stopped crying. Everyone looked at the king, at Elara, at the ledger wrapped in gold silk. The king opened his mouth to speak, to lie, to explain. For the kingdom you poisoned, Elara said quietly. And then she moved. September 5th arrived with a soft golden light that painted the throne room in warm hues. 3 weeks and 4 days had passed since the harvest feast, since Elara had stood on those steps and changed everything. The castle felt different now. Quieter. Lighter. Like a patient finally healing from a long illness. Elara stood by the tall windows, watching the morning sun climb over the mountains east of Alderheart. She wore a simple linen dress in pale blue, nothing like the stiff uniform she had worn for 12 years. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, still strange to feel after decades of pulling it back tight. She was 34 years old and learning who she was for the first time. Behind her, the throne room bustled with quiet activity. Workers removed the last of the old royal banners, gold and green, Theron's colors, and prepared to hang new ones. Deep blue with silver stars, the colors of the new era. The marble floors had been scrubbed clean of wine stains and worse. Fresh flowers filled the vases along the walls, not wilting roses but sturdy autumn asters in purple and white. The new queen sat at a simple wooden desk near the center of the room. Princess Lyra, Theron's cousin, had been pulled from a dungeon 3 weeks ago, pale and confused and terrified. Now she ruled with a quiet dignity that surprised everyone. At 28, she had spent 10 years in a cell for the crime of being more loved by the people than her cousin. She wore no crown. She said crowns were for people who needed to feel important. Elara had refused every title offered. Captain of the Guard? No. Royal Advisor? Thank you, but no. She had spent her whole life serving titles and positions. Now she just wanted to serve people. So she came to the castle most mornings, not as an official, but as a friend. She helped where needed. Listened when asked. Stayed quiet when silence was better. Kaelen appeared in the doorway, and her heart still did that little skip it had started doing 3 weeks ago. He wore simple clothes too, brown trousers, a cream shirt with the sleeves rolled up. No more dark spymaster's attire. No more lurking in shadows. The new queen had offered him any position he wanted. He had asked for nothing except a small office with a window. He crossed the room toward her, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. When he reached her side, he didn't speak. Just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the sun rise together. How is she today? Elara asked softly, nodding toward the queen. Better. She slept through the night for the first time. No nightmares. Kaelen's voice was warm with relief. He had taken the queen's safety as his personal mission, not because anyone asked, but because protecting people was simply what he did. What he had always done. They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment. 3 weeks ago, silence between them had been heavy with secrets and fear. Now it felt like a shared blanket, warm and safe. Elara's eyes drifted to the Queen's desk. Simple wooden thing, probably from someone's office, definitely not royal. On it sat a stack of papers, new decrees, trade agreements, letters from citizens who finally felt safe writing to their ruler. And beside the papers, holding them down, sat the chipped jade letter opener. She hadn't thought about it in days. Hadn't realized the Queen had been using it. Elara walked across the room without deciding to. Her feet carried her past the workers, past the flowers, past everything until she stood before the desk. The Queen looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Elara. You're here early." "Couldn't sleep." Elara's eyes stayed on the letter opener. "May I?" The Queen nodded, curious but not asking questions. That was one of the things Elara loved about her. She never demanded explanations. She trusted people to share what they needed to share. Elara picked up the letter opener. The jade handle was warm from the morning sun, not cold like she remembered. The chip in the edge caught the light, throwing a tiny shadow across a palm. She turned it over, feeling the weight, the balance, the familiar shape. 12 years of service. 3 weeks of truth. One small object that had witnessed everything. She thought about the girl who first held this blade, desperate to please, desperate to belong. She thought about the woman who had almost died because of that desperation. She thought about her father, watching from wherever dead spies went, probably shaking his head at how long it took his daughter to wake up. Kaelen appeared beside her, his presence steady and warm. He didn't speak, didn't touch her, just waited. "It's heavy," Elara said softly. The Queen tilted her head. "What is?" "This." Elara held up the letter opener. All of it. The weight of believing in the wrong person. The weight of being wrong about yourself. The weight of starting over. The Queen nodded slowly. "I spent 10 years in a cell believing I was nothing. That my life was over before it really began. Finding out I was wrong took almost as much strength as surviving the cell itself." Elara looked at her, this young woman who had lost a decade to her cousin's paranoia, who should be bitter and broken but instead radiated quiet strength. "How did you do it? How did you let go of the weight?" The Queen smiled. "I didn't let go. I just stopped carrying it alone." The words settled into Elara's chest like warm tea on a cold morning. She looked at Kaelen, at this man who had carried her safety for 15 years without her knowing, who had loved her in silence because a promise mattered more than his own happiness, who stood beside her now, not as a rival or a spy or a protector, but simply as himself. She placed the letter opener back on the desk. It landed softly, barely making a sound. The papers stayed put. The morning sun continued its climb. Life went on. Elara took Kaelen's hand. His fingers laced through hers naturally, like they had been doing it for years instead of weeks. "Walk with me," she asked. "Always," he said. They left the throne room together, stepping out into the castle courtyard. The September air carried the first hint of autumn coolness, a welcome change from August's heavy heat. Servants nodded hello as they passed. Guards smiled and went back to their posts. A young girl chased a puppy across the cobblestones, her laughter bright and free. They walked without destination, past the kitchens where Morwen now worked openly, his daughter helping Roldo beside him. Past the East Tower where they had rescued that same daughter, now just a tower again instead of a prison. Past the Undercroft entrance where they had hidden and planned and finally found each other. At the castle wall, they stopped and looked out at the city below. Alderheart spread across the valley, smoke rising from chimneys, market stalls opening for business, children running to school. Ordinary life. Precious life. "I don't know who I am yet," Elara admitted. Without the uniform. Without the titles. Without someone to serve. Kaelen squeezed her hand. "Good. That means you get to find out." "What if I don't like who I find?" "Then you change. That's the whole point of being alive. We are not statues, Elara. We are allowed to keep becoming. She turned to look at him, really look, the way she had that first day in the throne room when everything changed. His eyes held no secrets now. Just warmth. Just patience. Just love, quiet and steady as breathing. When did you get so wise? She asked. He laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. 15 years of watching you. You'd be surprised what a person learns when they're paying attention. Elara stood on tiptoes and kissed him softly. Just a brief press of lips, warm and sweet and full of promise. When she pulled back, his cheeks were slightly pink and he looked happier than she had ever seen him. Below them, the city continued its morning rhythm. Bells rang from the temple tower. A baker shouted about fresh bread. Somewhere a mother called her children home. Elara looked at the chipped jade letter opener in her memory, then at the real world spread before her. The scar remained, but it no longer ached. It was just part of her story now, one chapter among many. The sun climbed higher. Autumn approached, and two people who had spent 15 years as enemies began their first real day as something else entirely. Not rivals. Not protectors and protected. Just Elara and Kaelen, holding hands on a castle wall, ready to find out who they would become together.